hideous, hideous, wretched, wretched, coherent, coherent, gifted, gifted, plausible, plausible, forbid, forbid, forbidden, forbidden, steady, steady, steadfast, steadfast, territory, territory, territorial, territorial, famine, famine, feminine, feminine, steep, steep,
wag, wag,
majesty, majesty, majestic, majestic, mourn, mourn, penalty, penalty, blend, blend, phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenon, phenomenon,
addict, addict,
addiction, addiction, exaggerate, exaggerate, exaggeration, exaggeration, persecution, persecution, persecute, persecute, amid, amid, quote, quote, quotation, quotation, might, might, mighty, mighty, blunder, blunder, irritable, irritable, irritate, irritate, irritation, irritation, bankrupt, bankrupt, bankruptcy, bankruptcy, corrupt, corrupt, corruption, corruption, abrupt, abrupt, abruptly, abruptly, interrupt, interrupt, interruption, interruption, erupt, erupt, eruption, eruption, aptitude, aptitude, attitude, attitude, altitude, altitude,
A hideous face. A hideous face. A hideous building. A hideous building. Commit a hideous crime. Commit a hideous crime. A hideous noise. A hideous noise. A hideous monster. A hideous monster. Hideous expense. Hideous expense. Make the night hideous. Make the night hideous. Look hideous. Look hideous. Feel wretched. Feel wretched. Lead a wretched existence. Lead a wretched existence. A wretched poet. A wretched poet. A wretched house. A wretched house. A wretched mortal. A wretched mortal. Wretched weather. Wretched weather. A wretched cold. A wretched cold. A wretched nuisance. A wretched nuisance. A wretched food. A wretched food. A wretched accommodation. A wretched accommodation. Wretched stupidity. Wretched stupidity. Wretched health. Wretched health. A wretched inn. A wretched inn. A wretched scribbler. A wretched scribbler. A wretched traitor. A wretched traitor. A wretched life. A wretched life. A coherent plan. A coherent plan. Coherent light. Coherent light. Coherent scattering. Coherent scattering. A coherent story. A coherent story. An awkward sentence. An awkward sentence. A coherent explanation. A coherent explanation. A gifted musician. A gifted musician. A gifted player. A gifted player. Heaven gifted. Heaven gifted. A naturally gifted athlete. A naturally gifted athlete. Gifted children. Gifted children. A highly gifted artist. A highly gifted artist. Sound plausible. Sound plausible. Give a plausible excuse. Give a plausible excuse. A plausible story. A plausible story. A plausible rogue. A plausible rogue. A plausible assumption. A plausible assumption. A plausible conclusion. A plausible conclusion. Forbid the use. Forbid the use. Forbid a person wine. Forbid a person wine. Forbid a person to enter the house. Forbid a person to enter the house. Time forbids. Time forbids. Forbid mentioning. Forbid mentioning. Forbid outright. Forbid outright. Forbidden fruit. Forbidden fruit. Forbidden ground. Forbidden ground. Scribbling forbidden. Scribbling forbidden. Smuggle forbidden articles. Smuggle forbidden articles. A forbidden room. A forbidden room. A forbidden word. A forbidden word. Steady demand. Steady demand. Ready, steady, go. Ready, steady, go. A steady job. A steady job. A steady faith. A steady faith. A steady ship. A steady ship.
A steady gaze. A steady gaze. Steady friendship. Steady friendship. A steady pace. A steady pace. Make steady progress in one's work. Make steady progress in one's work. A steady man. A steady man. A steady policy. A steady policy. Steady principles. Steady principles. Steady a table leg. Steady a table leg. Steadfast loyalty. Steadfast loyalty. Steadfast love. Steadfast love. Everlasting love. Everlasting love. Steadfast character. Steadfast character. A steadfast gaze. A steadfast gaze. Steadfast faith. Steadfast faith. Steadfast man. Steadfast man. Enemy territory. Enemy territory. Disputed territory. Disputed territory. Foreign territory. Foreign territory. Trust territory. Trust territory. recover territory, recover territory, inviolable territory, inviolable territory, occupied territories, occupied territories, unexplored territory, unexplored territory, a leased territory, a leased territory, an acquisition of territory, an acquisition of territory, the most fertile territory, the most fertile territory, territorial disputes, territorial disputes, territorial waters, territorial waters, territorial seas, territorial seas, territorial instincts, territorial instincts, territorial air, territorial air, territorial expansion, territorial expansion, territorial integrity, territorial integrity, territorial jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction, territorial sovereignty, territorial sovereignty, territorial possession, territorial possession, territorial principle, territorial principle, territorial property, territorial property, a territorial owner, a territorial owner, have territorial ambitions, have territorial ambitions, harbor territorial ambitions, harbor territorial ambitions.
A severe famine, a severe famine, famine prices, famine prices, famine relief, famine relief, to raise money for famine relief, to raise money for famine relief, a water famine, a water famine, whole famine, whole famine, a labor famine, a labor famine, a house famine, a house famine, die of famine, die of famine, famine-laden districts, famine-laden districts, feminine cleanser, feminine cleanser, feminine intuition, feminine intuition, feminine beauty, feminine beauty, the traditional feminine role, the traditional feminine role, feminine vanity, feminine vanity, a steep hill, a steep hill, a steep slope, a steep slope, a steep climb, a steep climb, a steep descent, a steep descent, a steep flight of stairs, a steep flight of stairs, a steep decline in the birth rate, a steep decline in the birth rate, a steep fall in profits, a steep fall in profits, a steep raise, a steep raise, a steep incline, a steep incline, a steep rise in unemployment, a steep rise in unemployment, a steep price, a steep price, a steep story, a steep story, the rugged steeps of the mountain, the rugged steeps of the mountain, steep tea in boiling water, steep tea in boiling water, steep vegetables and vinegar, steep vegetables and vinegar, a sword steeped in blood, a sword steeped in blood, be steeped in crime, be steeped in crime, be steeped in prejudice, be steeped in prejudice, be steeped in French literature, be steeped in French literature, ruin steeped in gloom, ruin steeped in gloom, a dog wagging his tail, a dog wagging his tail, wag one's finger at a person, wag one's finger at a person, wag one's head, wag one's head, the dog's tail wagged, the dog's tail wagged, let the world wag as it will, let the world wag as it will, with a wag of the tail, with a wag of the tail, to wag school, to wag school, wag one's chin, wag one's chin, wag one's tongue, wag one's tongue, the majesty of the music, the majesty of the music, majesty of the law, majesty of the law, your majesty, your majesty, mock majesty, mock majesty, with majesty, with majesty, a majestic castle, a majestic castle, a majestic river, a majestic river, majestic scenery, majestic scenery, mourn bitterly, mourn bitterly, weep bitterly, weep bitterly, mourn over one's failure, mourn over one's failure,
Mourn over the death of one's friend. Mourn over the death of one's friend. Mourn the dead. Mourn the dead. To impose a penalty. To impose a penalty. A penalty clause in a contract. A penalty clause in a contract. The penalty for speeding. The penalty for speeding. Penalty for trespassing traffic rules. Penalty for trespassing traffic rules. The penalties of old age. The penalties of old age. Set a penalty. Set a penalty. Award a penalty. Award a penalty. Pay a fine. Pay a fine. Pay a penalty. Pay a penalty. A blend of tea. A blend of tea. Tea of our own blend. Tea of our own blend. Blend different cultures. Blend different cultures. Blend red with white. Blend red with white. Phenomenal speed. Phenomenal speed. A phenomenal success. A phenomenal success. Phenomenal ego. Phenomenal ego. Phenomenal self. Phenomenal self. Of phenomenal size. Of phenomenal size. Supernatural phenomenon. Supernatural phenomenon. A transitional phenomenon. A transitional phenomenon. A meteoric phenomenon. A meteoric phenomenon. An unnatural phenomenon. An unnatural phenomenon. An unprecedented phenomenon. An unprecedented phenomenon. Social phenomena. Social phenomena. The phenomena of nature. The phenomena of nature. An infant phenomenon. An infant phenomenon. A heroin addict. A heroin addict. Be a coke addict. Be a coke addict. Drug addict. Drug addict. An opera addict. An opera addict. Cocaine addiction. Cocaine addiction. The curse of drug addiction. The curse of drug addiction. Addiction to stimulants. Addiction to stimulants. Hopeless addiction. Hopeless addiction. Exaggerate facts. Exaggerate facts. Exaggerate a rumor. Exaggerate a rumor. Exaggerate one's misery. Exaggerate one's misery. Exaggerate one's own importance. Exaggerate one's own importance. Exaggerate grossly. Exaggerate grossly. A slight exaggeration. A slight exaggeration. A wild exaggeration. A wild exaggeration. A gross exaggeration. A gross exaggeration. Prone to exaggeration. Prone to exaggeration. Ludicrous exaggeration. Ludicrous exaggeration. Persecution complex. Persecution complex. Delusion of persecution. Delusion of persecution. Suffer persecution. Suffer persecution. Unjust persecution. Unjust persecution. Racial persecution. Racial persecution. Ruthless persecution. Ruthless persecution. Intense persecution. Intense persecution.
a persecution maniac, a persecution maniac, persecute a religion, persecute a religion, persecuted minorities, persecuted minorities, by persecuted by mosquitoes, by persecuted by mosquitoes, persecute a person with questions, persecute a person with questions, persecute pagans, persecute pagans, amid tears, amid tears, amid cheers, amid cheers, amid shouts of dissents, amid shouts of dissents, stand amid the crowd, stand amid the crowd, amid the mountains, amid the mountains, amid autumn foliage, amid autumn foliage, amid the global economic slump, amid the global economic slump, amid deafening cheers, amid deafening cheers. A direct quote. A direct quote. To quote Hamlet. To quote Hamlet. Quote a price. Quote a price. To quote from a book. To quote from a book. Quote for putting on a new roof. Quote for putting on a new roof. Quote unquote. Quote unquote. Put quotation marks. Put quotation marks. An apt quotation. An apt quotation. Identify a quotation. Identify a quotation. A direct quotation. A direct quotation. A quotation from the Bible. A quotation from the Bible. Stock exchange quotations. Stock exchange quotations. The current quotation. The current quotation. Spot quotation. Spot quotation. Forward quotation. Forward quotation. Bid quotation. Bid quotation. Give a quotation. Give a quotation. Submit a quotation. Submit a quotation. A quotation for painting a house. A quotation for painting a house. America's military might. America's military might. Might is right. Might is right. You might be right. You might be right. She might well cry. She might well cry. You might say that. You might say that. I would go if I might. I would go if I might. With all one's might. With all one's might. Do with one's might. Do with one's might. A mighty warrior. A mighty warrior. High and mighty. High and mighty. Mighty difficult. Mighty difficult. Driving mighty fast. Driving mighty fast. A mighty wind. A mighty wind. A mighty ruler. A mighty ruler. A mighty building. A mighty building. A mighty hit. A mighty hit. Make a mighty bother. Make a mighty bother. A mighty good thing. A mighty good thing. A mighty nation. A mighty nation. To make a terrible blunder. To make a terrible blunder. Blunder about. Blunder about. A series of political blunders. A series of political blunders. Commit a blunder. Commit a blunder.
Blunder a business. Blunder a business. Blunder away one's chance. Blunder away one's chance. Blunder out a secret. Blunder out a secret. Blunder out an apology. Blunder out an apology. A gross blunder. A gross blunder. A monstrous blunder. A monstrous blunder. A tactical blunder. A tactical blunder. To be tired and irritable. To be tired and irritable. An irritable gesture. An irritable gesture. Irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome. An irritable disposition. An irritable disposition. Irritate greatly. Irritate greatly. Irritate nerves. Irritate nerves. Irritate a wound. Irritate a wound. Irritate the passions. Irritate the passions. Feel irritation. Feel irritation. Show irritation. Show irritation. Express irritation. Express irritation. Soothe an irritation. Soothe an irritation. Relieve irritation. Relieve irritation. Bankrupt laws. Bankrupt laws. Bankrupt a company. Bankrupt a company. A bank goes bankrupt. A bank goes bankrupt. Be morally bankrupt. Be morally bankrupt. Be bankrupt in reputation. Be bankrupt in reputation. A moral bankrupt. A moral bankrupt. Be declared bankrupt. Be declared bankrupt. A bankruptcy filing. A bankruptcy filing. Shave off bankruptcy. Shave off bankruptcy. File for personal bankruptcy. File for personal bankruptcy. Moral bankruptcy. Moral bankruptcy. A trustee in bankruptcy. A trustee in bankruptcy. File for bankruptcy. File for bankruptcy. Go through bankruptcy. Go through bankruptcy. A petition in bankruptcy. A petition in bankruptcy. A corrupt regime. A corrupt regime. A corrupt judge. A corrupt judge. The corrupt press. The corrupt press. Corrupt officials. Corrupt officials. A corrupt civil servant. A corrupt civil servant.
A corrupt manuscript. A corrupt manuscript. Corrupt language. Corrupt language. Corrupt air. Corrupt air. Become corrupt. Become corrupt. Corrupt practices. Corrupt practices. Corrupt software. Corrupt software. Corrupt manners. Corrupt manners. Corrupt public morals. Corrupt public morals. Corrupt judge. Corrupt judge. Corrupt the electorate. Corrupt the electorate. Dispel corruption. Dispel corruption. Expose corruption. Expose corruption. Stamp out corruption. Stamp out corruption. A cesspit of corruption. A cesspit of corruption. Investigate alleged corruption. Investigate alleged corruption. Eradicate corruption. Eradicate corruption. Moral corruption. Moral corruption. An abrupt change. An abrupt change. An abrupt halt. An abrupt halt. An abrupt manner. An abrupt manner. Make an abrupt appearance. Make an abrupt appearance. Come to an abrupt end. Come to an abrupt end. An abrupt drop. An abrupt drop. An abrupt dismissal. An abrupt dismissal. Turn back abruptly. Turn back abruptly. Collapse abruptly. Collapse abruptly. Interrupt the view. Interrupt the view. Interrupt a speaker. Interrupt a speaker. Interrupt a journey. Interrupt a journey. An interruption to the power supply. An interruption to the power supply. Interruption of pregnancy. Interruption of pregnancy. Telegraphic interruption. Telegraphic interruption. Power interruption. Power interruption. Interruption of business. Interruption of business. An annoying interruption. An annoying interruption. Hostilities erupt. Hostilities erupt. Heat erupt. Heat erupt. A major volcanic eruption. A major volcanic eruption. An eruption of violent protest. An eruption of violent protest. Be in a state of eruption. Be in a state of eruption. Burst into eruption. Burst into eruption. The eruption of teeth. The eruption of teeth. A skin eruption. A skin eruption. Volcanic eruption. Volcanic eruption. A volcano in eruption. A volcano in eruption. Take an aptitude test. Take an aptitude test. Nurture one's aptitude. Nurture one's aptitude. Develop one's aptitude. Develop one's aptitude. Great aptitude. Great aptitude. Have an aptitude to vices. Have an aptitude to vices. Toting attitude. Toting attitude. A callous attitude. A callous attitude.
A sincere attitude. A sincere attitude. A friendly attitude. A friendly attitude. A bandwidth attitude. A bandwidth attitude. The attitude of mind. The attitude of mind. A positive attitude. A positive attitude. Have an attitude. Have an attitude. Show one's attitude. Show one's attitude. A do-or-die attitude. A do-or-die attitude. A hard-line attitude. A hard-line attitude. Altitude sickness. Altitude sickness. A high-altitude drop. A high-altitude drop. Measure the altitude. Measure the altitude. An altitude flight. An altitude flight. An altitude flying. An altitude flying. An altitude record. An altitude record. Take the sun's altitude. Take the sun's altitude. Lower its altitude. Lower its altitude. Lose altitude. lose altitude, develop altitude sickness, develop altitude sickness.